that was for those who came early. It was wonderful that so many folks did. I was glad that you settled yourself. But I was just talking about breathing. Breathing is really important. Many of us do it only sort of down to the very, very top of our lungs. If we've been through tough times in our lives, we may have learned actually in brilliant fashion how to breathe the tiniest, barest breath. That is one of our most important survival strategies. It's our sort of final end of the line survival strategy, is to play dead, as it's often called, or just to completely freeze. When we've learned that, we've learned to breathe such a tiny breath that no one will see that breath. It kept us alive. It doesn't oxygenate our brains well. It doesn't give us energy. And so consciously breathing to try and breathe all the way down into the depths of our lungs is a really valuable way of coming present to learning. Yes?
I just want to say, I wonder how long that's been in this world, in this generation, because from what I remember from history books and all, like, we used to be fighters, right? You gotta breathe when you fight, right? You gotta destroy countries and civilizations.
Well, that's true.
So this is just breathe. It's
Yes.
just been lately.
No, I think what I want to say is, as human beings, as we've evolved, we've learned both things. We've learned to take big, fierce breaths. That's why the yells at the beginning of a fight of many sorts, they gave us that big oxygenating breath. We've also learned to stay alive with tiny little breaths. The part of it that I think is new is that perhaps we're naming it more consciously as we study the brain more and as we have more of a neuroscience. But I think absolutely we've always known to take deep breaths, and we've also always known to take tiny, tiny breaths when we don't want anybody to notice that we're there. Yeah. We've learned also to hold in our energy, but I'm going to talk all about that as we go along. I have many things we need to do to start, and one of them is just to share a quiet breath together. So I happen to have a mindfulness practice. I'm sure many of you do. Many of you have other sorts of practices, but we all have a breathing practice, and many of us have technology too, and that is fine too. It will often be our bell to remind us as well, but you might choose to turn it off if you can, unless you need it. But let's just listen to the bell. I'm going to ring it 3 times and just breathe as you choose. If you can take a great deep breath, if you could close your eyes or even let your eyes drop to the ground as feels safe to you, let's just all get here first. Sometimes doing that and that beautiful hush that falls feels wonderfully life-giving to me. Sometimes it suddenly reminds me of church, which wasn't a place that was life-giving for me personally. and then I'm like, oh, maybe that's not quite it. But that's a useful reminder for me to name that piece, that any practice that feels right for somebody may not feel right for somebody else. So when we're thinking about supporting our own learning or supporting other people's learning, finding that right way that is right for us and right for them and is a collaborative piece is crucial. There is no one answer, and that's one of the key things. But before we dive right in, I want to both invite us all to connect to land and nature. It's a little harder to do on the 7th floor of a modern building. It's sort of harder to imagine our feet like roots going down into the wonderful fertile spring soil. We may have to do more imagining to do it here than we might in another setting. but I think it's an important thing for us all to do in every setting. And so, and of course, it is also really important that we do acknowledge here the original caretakers of this land, who I understand are the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I've heard some other lists, and so apologies if I've left out any Indigenous people who have made this land home. But I both want to recognize that this land was land that was taken in with the violence of colonial settlers, and that there has been a whole era of cultural genocide and the continuation of violence of so many sorts. So I want to recognize that, and I want to recognize the need we have for reconciliation. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking again, guys. Shannon, by the way. I'm from Manitoba, and I appreciate Ontario natives and you people, all Ontario people, because you do recognize the land acknowledgements. We don't do that in Manitoba. And even then, there'd be way too many lands to acknowledge. So like that. I just gotta mention that. Like, yeah.
Good. I'm glad, because
and also it's also kind of works against the whole acknowledging us, because it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, you know, like, of course it's not my land, but you're gonna think it's my land, but yeah, like I'm not even from here, you know.
Good for you for naming it. And I also want to name, I always feel a certain discomfort, because I always feels a little bit like
pity almost.
Well, that's not where my thinking goes.
I need my land.
Okay, give us a moment, Sharon. Hold on.
I used to be dramatic.
Yes. Hold on, give us some space, and then there'll be time to engage. But I just wanted to say, for me, there's a certain discomfort, because it always feels like it's an acknowledging that is so much not enough. It's so much just acknowledging violence, and then unless we're saying what we will do with it, then it doesn't feel useful. But so I want to recognize the ongoing violence. I also want to recognize that many settlers, and I include myself in that, is fleeing some version of violence. Whether we fled our own families or our own communities, or whether we fled larger aspects of violence. So violence in many forms for many people are part of the past of this country, and unfortunately, ongoingly part of our present. So I want to name that, and it's important to name it, especially always, but especially as part of this workshop. When some of you know, I first got into looking at issues of violence and learning way back in the 80s. And I started off getting completely overwhelmed, thinking, it damages body, mind, emotion, spirit. Oh my, damage. And I have a very vivid memory still of sitting with an Indigenous leader in the Northwest Territories, a pipe carrier, who said, no, you've got it all wrong. And she grabbed a napkin and she drew, which is why you've got just this little rough sketch. And she said, it's an off-balance world. Instead of having a nice equal balance between mind, emotion, body, and spirit in the Western society, we've got our center all off balance. We think mind's the only thing that counts. We think we try and sort of banish emotions. We think spirit only belongs in places of worship, and body, well, we've got that completely distorted in terms of when and where and how we do or don't pay attention to it. And so there you've got a wheel that's trying to roll with its center completely off. And so let's recognize that we are all in a world that has perpetrated violence, that continues to perpetrate it, that is still off balance. And when we're acknowledging where we are, we also have to acknowledge we're in a university building, university building for graduate students. And this can feel a place that it's definitely a place that privileges one type of knowing, and therefore can that knowing of our mind, and can easily seem to dismiss or actually dismiss other forms of knowing.
Isn't that off balance right there?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. So There'll be a chance to talk in small groups any minute now, so hold your thought for a moment. So I just want to say one of the things that I feel I'm always fighting against when we talk about violence and learning is a tendency for us to start saying, these people need, they need. And so this is one of my favorite slides. There is no them, there is only us. We all live in a violent society. We've all experienced more and less. I do not want to make it sound like we've all experienced the same thing. We're all in different skins, in different conditions, in different families, in different communities.
Different times.
In different times, it's true, absolutely.
But you may have been oppressed like thousands of years ago. We're just being oppressed the last couple of months.
It's true, it's true. So the big thing I want to say today is that we're not looking at people who've experienced violence as the problem. We're looking at our systems that are the problems that create hurdles. We know, and I do all my teaching assuming that most of us have experienced violence to a greater or lesser degree. Many of us will have experienced a lot more than we regularly say, and that I think all educational settings should operate on that assumption rather than the other way around. And so we know from the statistics, we know from our own lived experiences, if we include the range of violences, we know that it's there in every setting. So why do we pretend it's not? Why do we pretend that minds go to school alone?
Because we deal with so much other shit.
Hang on a second, Shannon. That wasn't an answer needed yet. All right. So I want to get, in 2 minutes, I'm going to get you to talk in your own tables. I promise, Shannon. Hold it for 5 seconds.
So sorry.
It's all right. It's good. I like your comments. I just want to make sure we move. I do. It's wonderful. All right. So here's a photo of me from work I was doing when I was trying to understand the lost little kid I had felt. But as you know, doesn't she look like that? She was trying to blend in. She used to try and disappear. She tried very hard all the way through school to be invisible. And she did quite well. And I actually now with the neuroscience understand that we actually can shut down our energetic field so well that we are almost invisible. So, but now, as you can see, I rather like taking the center stage. I used to describe it as hiding in the spotlight. But so I am an educator. Some of you know I've been around the literacy field since I first came to Canada in the 80s. I'm a researcher, but more and more I also play with visual arts. I these days add in these images. I'm the child of a couple who went through war, an extended family who went through war in Britain, of abuse, of various aspects. And I don't say that in order to, I'm not asking anybody to disclose anything today. I don't expect any detailed stories to come out here. But what I want to make clear is that assumption that most of us have had stories and they shape us. Whatever we have been through, whatever the conditions of our lives, the good, the bad, I could have shown you many slides to tell you the wonderful supportive things. I could tell you about my class, race, and educational privilege. I can tell you about traumas. They all live in the same body, and we all have conflicting stories. And welcome, find a spot.
Amen.
And no, it's all good. Find a spot. And we all have those mixes in our lives. And so it's important to recognize that, because otherwise we way too easily get into that slide back into that other. So I'm going to invite you to reflect for a second on who you are, what's influenced you professionally, personally, what conditions shape you, and what violence, trauma, and neglect you know intimately. I'm not asking you to tell anybody about that. I'm just asking you to notice that in yourself, because it's the mix that shapes how we will be present and how we will be present to others. Whether we've got dreadful experiences ourselves or had glorious, life-giving childhoods, or some mix of the two. If we know that, turn to that, acknowledge that, then we can connect with others honestly and truly. And through connection is one of the most important things we can do that makes a difference. And so that's a piece that we'll be coming back to during the afternoon. So I'm actually now going to ask you quite quickly just to introduce yourself to each other. There's a collection of things at your place. There are some fiddles at your place. In a basket are things to fiddle with, and I'll talk more in a minute about why they're there. But at every table, there's some sort of collection. So let yourself just take a moment to grab one of those things that sort of calls your name. Don't be too rational about it. Don't think too carefully. Let one something in that collection call your name, and then literally just turn to the others in your group, say your name, and say where you work and what thing you have picked up. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes. So don't one person tell a 5-minute story because the others won't get a chance to say their name. Oh yeah, you have it. Yeah. Perfect.
Did you take
We all work together, so
Oh, I thought that was
interesting. I just wanted to talk about so not a lot. And then I got new stuff, and I actually started But then I I've seen every documentary. She loves sharks. She doesn't. So sharks.
They have all really great lines. When I find them in the workshop or something like that. Somebody was going to make these things. What did you just learn?
Or else you can toss. People like toss. Take it off and snap. Is it wood? Take the other crap.
I never want to go to your first. I've also play fingers. I just saw you. I wish I was you.
I would say a little more in a moment about why. Might think about Awesome.
Yes.
I want one of those.
Of course.
Beautiful.
Swim. If something scares me in the water.
You notice I am producing some rather strange noisemakers, though I got beautiful help from over there because that particular noisemaker is a really wonderful one. I want to tell you just why I do. One of the things I suspect we all know about nervous systems is that they can very easily rise in agitation. And that moment of feeling like, oh my God, I wasn't supposed to be talking, can be one of those moments that rise for us, depending on what our past and present experiences are. I once worked with some trade teachers, and one of them said, I don't know why you're telling me it's a problem to bang on the desk, because it gets absolutely everyone's attention. And I was like, yeah, it gets everyone's attention, but half the people no longer have any blood flow to their frontal lobes of their brain because they've gone into full fight or flight mode, and they actually are no longer going to hear you. They're quiet, and so it might work for you in some ways as a classroom, but you probably would prefer not to speak to an empty classroom. You'd like to speak to people who are present to learn, and you've probably just created yourself the equivalent of an empty classroom. Now, that's a rather extreme example, but I think we often do somewhere along that continuum, even just the yell to draw attention. So I play a little bit with trying to figure out what might feel like an invitation to the next thing, rather than something that tells us off for the last thing. And it's a fine line. The best I've ever experienced of that was co-facilitating with somebody who is an amazing musician. So felt like the perfect way to do it was just to wander around playing a tin whistle. And so it really was like the Pied Piper. Everyone was like, oh, where are you going? I'm coming too. Some of us don't necessarily feel we're quite that talented, so a shaker or a train whistle. But one of the things I really invite you is to think about what things, all the way through, think about what things feel like they're creating conditions for learning, what things are getting in the way. And as I say, we're all different, so something that works for somebody might not for somebody else. So it's always about a balancing act. It's always about finding a sort of a tension between possibilities. And if we're the one leading or ones leading, trying to create the environment for others, it has to feel real for us. Somewhere along the line, I thought I ought to just pretend to play the tin whistle. And I realized, actually, I could probably not, that just wouldn't be me. Maybe I could learn to, bang the drum a few times, and maybe that might become me. So I don't want to say get caught in some version of you, but don't get caught into something that feels unreal either. And do play and explore. I met some adult educators in New England who sang opera to sing every, opera style, to sing every direction. And the students just adored it, and they adored it, and they had fun. Not in this lifetime would I do that, but you might find that there's something that is you that you could find playful, because obviously the less we can aggravate and agitate nervous systems, the better. The more we can calm them and soothe them and create an environment where people want to be, the better. And sound and our ways of inviting, and engaging can be some of those things that do either. So I hope you connected with each other with a certain amount of fun with the things at your table. Just a couple of comments. Anybody find something particularly delightful in it? Anything that did you have fun with your puppet or your sound or
the thunder stick?
Your thunder stick, yes. Just awesome sound. Anybody else just that enjoyed the fun?
I find we come from different worlds.
Yes, I bet. And different worlds can lead to an incredible.
Even though we're all born in Canada, or most of us.
Most
we're still
yeah.
very different.
Yeah, interesting. Yes.
Too, holding an object that maybe you're drawn to kind of opens you up.
Yes.
Maybe if you're feeling shy or not.
Yes. Yes.
It's a nice lead in.
Yeah, lovely. It takes us out of what our rational brain says about how we should present ourselves.
It humanizes us.
Yeah, it's true, eh? You had to comment over that.
So I was just going to say, many of us are either work together or know each other through connections, but we made a new friend today and then invited that friend out to our program. So,
Yeah.
Wonderful place to connect.
Yes. Often we can get caught in which story to tell, but if we've sort of picked an object and let that guide us, it shifts it a little. So I told several people I was laughed at for about, my partner just thought I was wild. Like, how many weeks of workshop are you doing that you're bringing all this stuff? Just an afternoon bath. But I wanted to bring a range of stuff so that you would see which things do you connect to, which things can you easily gather up, which would you enjoy using. I rated the mini stuffies from my 10-year-old chosen grandchild who kept saying, and you want them for what, Jenny? But he really loved choosing which ones he thought would work. The finger puppets are our joint possession, and the musical instruments are our joint possession.
Where'd you get those?
Oh, you just keep an eye out, and they find their way to you. You collect them at yard sales and all sorts. All right, anybody find it really off-putting? Because that's valid too. I want to invite the space for the things that don't work for you as well as do. You're welcome to share them too, because there will always be the mix. Some people find it intimidating. It's sort of I've been told sometimes a sense of, well, do you think we're kids? Or sometimes I didn't know what you were going to make me do. And so there was some anxiety around that. So notice any of those. Feel free to share when you want to, not if you don't want to, but it's all can be true. So of course I can ask the exact same questions about the students you connect with. And you might just hold that thought for a moment and think about, because I want to make sure that we cover quite a range of things. I'm going to come back to the students you work with in just a moment or two, but I wanted to ask just exactly the same questions, some of which you may have answers to, some you may not. Some of their answers may be very similar to yours, some may be different, but there's that question too. Oh, I got things out of order. Sorry, you already did that activity. All right. So I wanted to, you also all have a handout at your table. You have just a one-pager. I am very averse to wasting paper. So if somewhere along the line you decide this one-pager was not useful to you, or you've got all you want from it, pass it on to somebody else if you possibly can. That one-pager also has the sort of layout of where we're going together. We began with some breathing, some grounding, that first C. I seem to have got carried away with the idea of 6 C's in the last while. Thought it would help us all remember. And it feels like it speaks to what I see as so important as we turn towards the ways that violence, neglect, and any other traumatic experiences may shape how we engage in life and learning. And so I've asked us to do a few things to sort of bring us into the room, to get us here. We breathe, and now we're about to move on to curiosity. And for me, that's an absolute foundation of what it looks like when we turn towards violence and learning. One of the neuroscientists that I find actually often quite annoying, but who has one of the statements that I found most useful, Norman Deutsch, he says, we fail to understand the brain and its plasticity, its way it can shape and be reshaped, if we think there can ever be one solution to everybody's experiences of trauma. Because everybody's brain is shaped by exactly the constellation of conditions they experience. So there's no, oh, this works for those people in this room. It's really about recognizing each one of us is different and what we can bring from our full selves to those we're trying to support and help on their journey and their full selves is we can bring curiosity to share with them, rather than some sense that there is a fix. We are not, as Arlene, that Indigenous elder I spoke to you about at the beginning, taught me, we are not just damaged souls. There may be things that have damaged us along the way. There may be things that have hurt us along the way, but we also are mighty beings. And if we relate only to that idea of damage, we will actually not be able to be trustworthy allies and supporters. We need to come from our full selves and acknowledge other people's full selves. And curiosity is really central in that process. And often changing our point of view, because how we look at things changes them. We are a society that loves labels. I was saying this morning, I was remembering a wonderful Frontier College student that I worked with many years ago. I have no idea where she is this day. I hope she is doing well. She was fierce in the idea that we should not have labels. As I bought name tags, I thought of her because she would not wear a name tag. It was one last label. It was one more indignity in a life that had offered her too many. And that is so true for so many. We go to labels with such delight in this society. And we are story-making beings, and so it makes sense that we make stories out of the patterns we see. Unfortunately, in this society, we've given some stories a lot more credibility than others. We even call them truth. We call them science, and forget that they are stories from one point of view that see some things beautifully. I've been very excited with what some of the neuroscience is allowing us to see. A lot of what it's allowing us to see is things that people have known for millennia and that had been discounted in our Western ways of knowing. But I can see some of what it offers us. So one of the things I invite in curiosity is to not let the labels be the thing that shapes how we understand, but to put those on one side and invite others to put them on one side. Invite people to say, well, what patterns is it it's describing? And do you have any patterns that conflict with that? What does that show you? What doesn't it show you? What else would I know about you separate from that pattern? So it's not to say there isn't some truth in that pattern that we as a society have given a label to, but if we see it as a problem pattern, as one that has to be fixed, then we stop seeing full humanity and we go into fix-it mode. There was a really good logic why I put these here at this moment. That isn't what I had about to come out of my brain, but I will go there at this time because, in fact, it does fit. It's just I thought I was going somewhere else. I said to some of you that there was a reason I would explain why there's a basket in each group, and in that basket you will find Play-Doh, some sort of odd toy or stress ball, pipe cleaners, stones, and they are there to experiment with. You can see why it connects to curiosity. They are there to explore, and for many of us, fiddling with something helps to keep mind and body more firmly together.
Is this a lava rock?
It is. So different fields of rock, smooth rock, rough rock. I have to say, though I came with a bike trailer absolutely loaded to the gills, I did not bring any large rocks. I have a friend who I sometimes facilitate with who will bring a carload of, rocks this big. She really prefers to teach only out in the country where the rocks are there, but if she's forced to teach in the city, she will bring all sorts of rocks. Because she says rocks change the environment. They change the energy field in the room. And I have seen that she is absolutely right. I'm afraid it's not one of the things I can do. Maybe my desire to travel everywhere by bicycle then sort of gets in the way of carrying large rocks, but we all have our different styles and contradictions and tensions that we find our way through. But those things are there to explore with. I've already heard some folks say, oh, we don't have that in our program. Maybe we should. And maybe you can have big rocks. Maybe you can have bigger plants, things that change the energy in different ways. But if you haven't really explored it, try exploring this afternoon and just notice. Do they help? Do they hinder? Do you have a different experience than others around you? So curiosity, because in the end, what we're looking for is find ways to respond to the underlying messages in everything, in our struggles to learn, in our behavior, in our presence, in our absence. It's all a message. It's all a message sometimes from our deeper selves that's not consciously made. And I have this silly slide here. Some of you may know this kid's book. I meant to bring the book with me, but I'm afraid it didn't find its way into my bag. It's an old book that I only met in recent years. Some of you may know it from childhood, but maybe not many of you are old enough to. There's no such thing as a dragon. And it's a very silly story of mother insisting that dragons cannot be real. And the more she insists they can't be real, the bigger the dragon gets. Until, as you see in this picture, the dragon takes the house off down the street. And I include it here because it captures that sense that what we are not paying attention to just gets bigger. And when we're curious about it, most of the time, it is manageable what is needed. So I can even I'll tell you one just very quick story. I used to work with a literacy student. I've written about her over many years as Mary, and while she lived, she always read anything that I wrote. She chose that name, and she believed vehemently that every literacy program had to address the impact of violence on learning in a way that really turned towards it. And but she came to every group I ever led, but she was often in an enormous tears. And I was always trying to sort of block that out so I could pay attention to the group and sort of minimize it. And one day I thought, okay, if she can't be calmly here, actually maybe I can't pay attention, so maybe she needs to leave. So I was all ready to say that to her, and I said, what do you think you need? Do you think there's anything that would make it possible for you to share me with the rest of the group, to feel okay today? And she said, a hug. Really? That's all you needed? We had a hug. We just talked a tiny bit about what was going on for her. She settled down and was gloriously present for the whole afternoon. And I thought we often frame it as it is something that is very big, unless we get it. And then often it's great, find a spot. There are a few spots, honest. Some folks may have expanded to fill all spots, but there are spots. Welcome. So it can often feel enormous. So that's my lead in to ask you to do a little bit of thinking again, which is just to think, I'm rather fond of many of Thich Nhat Hanh's wisdoms. He's been the influencer of my current Buddhist teachers. And one of his things is no mud, no lotus. And I often find that a useful reminder that the mud is there. The mud can be really sticky, messy, hard to get through, but it is that mud that creates the space for lotuses to grow. And so I just want to invite you to think a little bit about just silently for a moment, what's the mud in your setting that you feel you're wading through? And then I'm going to invite you to reflect particularly on, is there a particular student or situation or interaction in terms of what you bring to it that you really struggle with? Or some particular student who really struggles to learn and you wish you knew how to be more of a supporter for their learning. So I'm really just going to invite you to quietly think for a moment about maybe an individual scenario that, is a particular concrete moment where you really felt, I wish I knew more what to do, or I didn't do that the best way possible. I wish I had more space to think about it and do it differently. So just an invitation for a little bit of a reflection on what is the particular mud in your setting that connects to the idea of how we support learning. And as I say, the mud can be in ourselves as much as in those we're working with. It can certainly be very much in the difficult conditions we work with and the stresses that the particular way of framing. I said we, asked you to sort of move aside from some of the traditional framings. unfortunately, I know we all work within framings that are often very oppressive of our funders or our larger organizations and so on. So it's not like we can move aside from everything. Some of it shapes our days in ways that we are caught by. Hang on a sec. So what I want you to do actually is think quietly and then talk to one person at your group here. Try not actually to go to a full 6 or even 8 or 9, or however many that tiny group over there has become, because you won't get as much airtime for your own individual piece. So either think alone or with one person if you can. If you break the rules because it feels like it works better for you, I'm not complaining. But you've just got to 5, 10 minutes at most, I'll watch and listen to the room to just get a hold of your own scenario that will then continue to sort of be in the backdrop, I hope, as we think about from curiosity to connection to conscious awareness to conditions. And we'll come back to it as it does that or for any change of views. Over to you.
Shall we discuss it?
There's a question.
Yes, I'm good, I've got water and hot tea. I'm well supplied, I just have to pay attention to it, not listen. Don't think it over, that's true.
When people are angry, so I gotta work on my stuff to be there, to not disappear, to try and focus, to deal with whatever's happening. When there's anger, I easily dissociate. There's no way. But I have to try hard to stay there and try and deal with it without disappearing myself. That's, I'm on there.
Can I say? I think
Speaking of that,
so I usually like to have understanding of calling outside the goal. That's when
But I still
now you're not. And now I'm seeing that part.
what I do now. I'm not into my organization, the body is the funder, and sometimes I have to also be part of the body, making switches that we're going up and running, getting up and running as well, like make the solar park stay. I feel like that's how I take her forward, like influence of things on your life. I think they're all like I am influenced and I also influence on certain decisions in my heart. I yeah, so funders are the ones, and they really don't understand where our funds are coming from. They have no idea what is taking the democracy knowledge is everything for adult learners to be in this position where they are. They finally acknowledge themselves that I need to learn. And then suddenly you have a timeline that you have to go, you want to tell that you can't stay the program for 1 year. Whereas we, as people who are educated, went right? Well, if you're in 1 years or even more if you're like going to university and for our learners, they're like 2 years, not 1 year. If you're past that, then you're like the program is wrong. Whatever, I have a lot of questions with how long you have been in education. Yeah, none of those are ever considered, and none of these things are ever even part of the reporting. There is no school for a course, there is no skill structure, so there is no scope for us to inform these students what are going on in one program. So we are the real ones.
So where do the women go? You know, like when you say, okay, time's up, I'm on, where do they go?
Another program, so it is like they're going to be doing the same program in a different organization. So the way the funders feel is like if they've been into your organization for so long, it means that they have learned enough from it. They have to go away to a different organization that will give them a breath of fresh air, new perspective of learning.
I have trouble with these things are all changing. You know what I mean? And also, like, it's not like, you know, you're going to do that's it, right? Like, it's always, it's always growing, it's always changing.
That's what it is. It's really hard to be the devil's advocate as my role, and like, I think about my daughter. It's terrible.
We have different functions too, so the program that I do, so it's much more relaxed, and there's not matter how to work. I'm thinking about your supervisor, and ever the advisor is from the mainstream, like mine, not
It's a glorious buzz, and I do like the hush that comes just from a very gentle shaker. I'm always fascinated that even through the hubbub, people do still hear, you do still hear just this little gentle noise. So thank you for paying that attention. I hope I didn't cut right in the middle of your thinking, but I want to keep a nice pace all the way through the afternoon so that we have both a sense of, again, this balance and tension between engaging yourself and listening to some of what I want to share and get through the sequence. So we will keep on going through. Any just I'm only going to call for just one or two things again to the whole group. Any surprise that feels really interesting to share? Anything, any commonality or striking difference in you, if you shared anything around your scenes?
So my name's Rebecca. I'm an education assistant at the Native Women's Resource Center. So I find sometimes when I just started, I'm very new, I only started 4 days ago and I started teaching. And I usually work with youth, like Indigenous youth, and now I'm working with Indigenous adults. And I find one of the challenges is when teaching a class, a lot of Indigenous people, including like I'm First Nation, so a lot of Indigenous people are oppressed, and so they're not ever given the space to speak. So when teaching and facilitating a class, and then there's they're not ever given the space, it seems like sometimes there's a want to have a voice and to take some of that space, and it doesn't come from an ill place, but it comes from a place that they just want a place to speak. So that has been something I'm starting to learn to navigate in a way where how can I give them the opportunity to have that space, and how can I teach them that there's certain settings where it's great to listen and learn as opposed to input. Yeah.
Lovely, useful one to sit with throughout this afternoon.
Yes.
For all of us, you know.
Yes, exactly.
And there is always a tension as we try to figure out how to make space for everybody and when to sort of make space to listen and to speak. So, anything just out of that process of settling into your own scenario or to hearing others that feels like it should come to the whole group? All right, well, hold that scenario in the back of your mind as we go through the afternoon. I've got a couple more things I wanted to say about curiosity. And I sort of began to speak. This was actually the slide I had thought I'd put earlier. I change them around every time when I look at them before and add some in and take some out, and then I'm surprised where they are. But I began to mention earlier on that idea of it's really valuable, I think, if we shift away from fixing. And if we notice our own language that has some edge of that, we may think we're never that crass that we're sort of saying, oh, we're just going to stick you back together like my ugly plate image there. But often subtly in our voice to ourselves or to others, there is that sort of fix them mode or fix us mode. And there's a couple of things in that. We can't let down our defenses, either from ourselves if we're trying to fix ourselves, or others in relation to us if we think we've got the answer. I had a wild experience of that where I was staying with a friend who gets very lost very easily, and we kept exploring this. We were staying on a writing retreat and we were exploring the city, and I kept trying to show her so that she'd get a grasp of the city before I left her on her own because she was going to get lost. And finally one day she said, I'm not broken and I don't need fixing. And I was like, oh, and I realized that I had thought I was just helping her out of feeling worried about her when she was on her own and I left. And of course, what I was giving was all those messages that there was something wrong with her. And so then all she could do was defend against me rather than loosen into telling me what she was afraid of, or what she had as strategies that already worked for her, or how she thought she was going to cope in this strange city. But I was so busy fixing that I hadn't even realized I was fixing. Yes.
Just a quick question. In terms of how to navigate, so a lot of us work with vulnerable youth, but how to navigate those that at a young age really identify with certain diagnoses or certain challenges, and that solution to them really does make them feel better. They find comfort in it. How to gear them away from that fixing as a comfort to more of a growth as a...
I think there's where curiosity is absolutely central. So curiosity about how it serves, what it makes visible, what it disappears, what would you look like if you didn't have that label. Curiosity sounds like such a sort of simple, hardly worth talking about, a little flimsy.
Yeah.
But in fact, I think it's our most robust tool. when we can turn towards each other with genuine curiosity, not that false curiosity that says, I don't know why you're doing this, which is quite often what seeps in. But when we can really have, I had a student I was working with many years ago, and she told me over and over and over again the same difficult story. And I was despairing of it, and I was closing down and not listening to it well. And I just happened to talk about it with a trauma therapist that I was using for some support in that process. And she said, well, have you asked her why she's telling you it over and over again? Yeah. Well, never. No, of course not. I'm busy trying to defend and feeling badly that I should listen better. So then the next day I said to her, you tell me that a lot. Do you have a sense of is there something I'm not getting? Or, what do you think? And she said, oh, have I told you it before? I didn't realize. I said, yeah, quite a lot. What do you think? We ended up with a lovely, rich conversation about what it meant to her and how much it shapes her and how she feels nobody really hears it. This lovely, rich conversation. She never told me it again. But I tell you, obvious as you can get, I could have gone my lifetime without thinking about it. I was being good, I was listening, I was being kind, all sorts of foolish things. But really, I wasn't wanting to listen, so I probably wasn't listening well anyway, because I was bored with it. And I told that story to one educator who said, one of the things I say sometimes is I'm bored. Have you got any other stories you could tell me? And I said, oh, I don't think I could say that. And then I looked at her and I thought, yes, I've seen you do that. And I've seen you do that with complete warmth and sincerity, and it works for you. So again, there's where I mean about it has to be true to us. But I think curiosity is a real key, because we can never dismiss for anybody else other people. The labels are helpful sometimes. I have an admin assistant for whom the labels got her into college, got her through college. They have been very helpful. Drugs are something that have really worked for her. She is furious when anybody suggests that they're not the answer. They're not the answer. Medication isn't the answer for everybody, but it's not the answer for everybody either. Back to that piece about the plasticity of the brain. And so when we're an ally, we can always just be curious. Does it serve you? Does it obscure? What does it do? Maybe they want to observe more. Yes.
Yeah, when I hear the word curiosity, the other words that come to me is wonder.
Lovely.
Amazement.
Lovely.
And when you are genuinely curious, because for me, I find that I'm consciously aware and thinking, and I'm making connections happen, and then natural connections that happen. We just end up being at the same place at the same time.
Beautiful, yes.
And then eyes locked, and then you go away, and then you come back, and then and you're looking for a solution, but you don't need to find a solution there and there.
Yes,
and
beautiful.
That's the naturalness of
yes. And that, interestingly, the latest neuroscience is showing so much more about how our brains have a tendency for healing. And that one of the things that can make the biggest difference is trustworthy others accompanying us. And that accompaniment can allow us to settle. And of course, yes, it connects to attachment, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Exactly right. Exactly one of our tools of understanding. And yes, that sense of wonder and curiosity, and noticing our language too, noticing what language does, noticing what words we're using, noticing it of others too. I noticed, what does that mean to you? Because to me, it means this. That sort of curiosity can really help. So my last statement around curiosity was just this idea of find metaphors and stories. You'll hear me say this 1,000,001 times. We are meaning-making beings. We are storytelling beings. We've told stories back to the beginning of time. And as I said, now we have a terrible tendency to privilege some stories over others. We call them not stories. We call them something else. We have a real movement towards our disembodied stories, but being curious and opening up and telling different stories and different metaphors can really be a way in. That's part of why all the metaphoric stuff is here in the room to spark your imagination. Audrey, yes.
I'm glad we're spending some time on curiosity and curious because I think it's a core fundamental piece of literacy work.
Yes.
You know, if you think about it in our lives when we're young, very young children, we are curious because we survive. Right? Curiosity and survivability goes hand in hand. I don't know if it's a metaphor, but I like the moments when I'm working with students and there's a visceral sense of, I'm now following your lead. I'm following your curiosity. As an instructor, I'm in the right place. So if I can hang out with you for a little while and listen to you, we'll see where you go. And all I'm doing is sort of going, hey, I kind of noticed that. Did you notice that?
Yes.
Whatever, you know, and those could last for minutes or they could go class over class.
Yes. No, absolutely beautiful. That I'm noticing, are you noticing, is a lovely way of framing. And I've worked with elementary teachers who've come back with like staggered by how their class changed by just having that sort of noticing. And noticing then at the beginning, noticing when a kid's foot is vibrating rather than waiting until the kid has exploded, and together beginning to notice what that means. And, you know, I think that's true. It's a story of kids, and I know most of you are working with adults, but I think it's true of all of us, that piece of can we notice at the beginning before we've gone right down the slippery slope.
So my
Go
whole
ahead.
point, I
Yes.
say,
Finish. Yeah.
the point is, I think it's really helpful to think of curiosity as a feeling and not as a abstract concept. It's a visceral knowledge that us educators rely on. I think that's really important to, again, how am I in my body right now? What am I thinking?
Yes.
That was my point.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad you got it fully in, and you're reminding me of bodies. I intended us to take just a very brief break for sustaining our bodies, stretching our bodies, and we're about to move into the next of my precious C's, connect. And so I am actually going to invite you just to take a moment to replenish your little bowl of supplies or your piece of fruit or whatever. Head to the washroom if you need, and come back, because we're going to do just a little bit of movement then. So come back and stand and
Just keep going all the way down. You'll see a sign.
Thank you for doing a lovely
I retired in 2000.
That's why
No, I didn't. I'm getting there. Have you read the class? I have a whole stack of books, and I've been so you're that's lovely.
I can't eat 2 scrambled eggs.
I think so. Good. The volunteer slash client. I know, right? Yeah. Where do you work? I don't work. I'm the volunteer slash client. Like their superstar or something. I don't think so. I mean, like, I don't think I am. But no, I'm just giving back. What? Wow, you know English? Huh? Do you know English? You're good at it? Me either. I know. Like my people were like, they were like, oh, Sharon, come help us tutor writing. Yeah, I was here. So you're about it. I don't exactly right. Yeah.
You see, that's question.
No, you must be a good carrier. Because I always forget information. Yeah, man. I can't get enough. And
If you're not listening, so you only share.
I'm
about to.
You're very old school. You're from Manitoba? Oh, yeah. In Ontario. So you're like Cree? Ojibwe. Me too. But I'm much better. From Waiwai-Sakapo.
Yeah, but how'd you get here?
I went to treatment in Guelph and Homewood.
Oh, okay.
I met a
You're welcome to stay standing if you like, because I'm going to ask you to do a couple of movement type things. I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to find it a little hot and stuffy in here. Maybe it's just because I'm working hard. But
wait, stand or
yeah, stand if you can. Sit if you're comfortable. It's all fine. I might get you into. I might draw you up in a moment or two. So, anybody familiar with Brain Gym? Yes. Do you use it in your work?
Yes, I teach elementary.
Ah, awesome. Okay. So Brain Gym is an interesting thing because it's the idea that there is movement we can do that helps our brain. And there was a little while where it became very exciting and often used in elementary schools. And then there was a period where there was like, oh, there's no brain research to prove that makes any sense. Don't know why we're doing it. And now, more recently, the neuroscience is really showing why. One of the things about it is that it's suggesting it's about helping us to connect within our own brains. And so one of the things that tough experiences are thought to do is that it actually, especially if we have very tough experiences as little kids, the insula that connects our right and left portions of our brains doesn't develop as fully. Little mites haven't yet got a full development of that. You know how any of you have 2-year-olds in your life or have in your memory 2-year-olds where they are just beginning to connect to their left brain, but they're very often vehemently in total meltdown. They can't quite get across from the emotional side of right brain to that language part of left brain. So one of the things that we can do is do things that help us move across our right and left brain. So we're just going to do a couple of things of Brain Gym that will just help us maybe connect ourselves. So one thing we can do is just literally move around, like move our arm in a way, and we could use both arms or we could mirror other people where it crosses our midline. So we're moving our right and left, and beautiful. Oh, yes. You can do multiple infinity symbols and even that gentle movement can begin to connect our brain in ways that are quite startling. How it will do it. It will help right and left to connect. Another piece that gets a little more energetic that we might want to do if you've got as far as standing, you can do from sitting too, is to hit left leg with right and right with left. And as you do that, that too is asking right to move and left to move, and that coordinates us and activates and opens us the brain. So it can wake us up. You can totally do it from sitting. You can do it really gently. Some of us can find it really remarkably, surprisingly challenging because it is about connecting our brain. Don't laugh at anybody else, only yourself, because we each have our brain doing its own thing differently. And then we have printers doing their own thing too. So do it as much or as little as you like. You can get really fancy if you're feeling really energetic, and you can go side to side. You can do it this way, whatever.
I don't want to sprain my leg.
You can also, yes, don't strain anything. You can also do a more gentle connecting right and left. Just put your hands like this, turn them around. That too is a different form of connecting that can be helpful. And then the last one I will invite you to do is just what I find sort of fun, which is you sort of work on your ears as if you're unraveling. You know, we have that lovely little curled bit around the edge. Well, you just sort of work gently at them, not so hard that you feel like it hurts, but like you're just unraveling that curved bit of your ear. And what that does is activate all the nerves around our ear and sends messages into our brain and makes it just as a little bit more awake to what we hear. I don't know your name right at the back. Do you have any other brain gym piece you would love to share? One more?
No, I think you covered.
Have I covered the main ones for you?
Okay.
Okay, awesome. For me, those ones just help to sort of waken us up, waken our senses a little, because our senses are changed through trauma. So it's really important. Yes. All right, so find a seat again. You could move for a new seat if you prefer. You could stay where you are with those you're currently connected with.
Very engaged.
Wonderful. The different little buzzes are wonderful. I am not critical of it. We've got a glorious energy in the room. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate that you're engaging with and thinking about how weirdly challenging those little pieces are. One of the reasons I like them is that they're not sort of physically big challenges, but they are sort of surprisingly puzzling little pieces. And they do help to shift something. They do help to connect our parts of our brain. And it is one of the wonderful things about us is that we have this many part of brain. And one of the tough things is that trauma can leave us with the parts feeling very disconnected. And so that enhancing connection is really key. So connection is key on so many levels. As many of us know, it can make it challenging just to connect to ourselves. So often I know I have taught over the years students who felt like, I'm not sure anybody's really home there. It feels like there's a sort of absence. And now with all the trauma work, I think back and think, oh, I think there was a huge amount of trauma. I wish I'd have known more then how to invite more presence in gentle ways and not just think, oh, that's who that person is. Because I think really we know so much more now about how the brain is always changeable. We really don't have to be saying, oh, that's just who someone is. But we also can only be creating the space for somebody to find the possibility of change themselves. We can't be making anybody else change. And we don't want to be making anybody feel that they're not okay just the way they are. Because that permission, that sense of acceptance is the only thing that makes it possible to change. So it's a strange thing. But I'm sure you know much about how in trauma, in neglect, our whole being moves to this alert mode. And when we're in alert mode, only things necessary for immediate survival are there. And so we don't necessarily get to connect with our whole self because our whole self is buried behind all the tough things we've experienced. And I just began to mention that sense about right and left brain and that they need to work together. And as some of you may know, we used to talk about people being right-brained or left-brained as if there was some sense that we were one or the other. That's not really helpful, and there's much more understanding now that all of our brain does work together. We just may give more precedence to the perspective of one side or the other. So right is the more flowing, it's the more emotional, you can see this is actually a Dan Siegel image, and one of the interpersonal neurobiologists, he's even put it together to sort of show some of the differences. Left is linear, logical language. It is much more rigid.
Resourceful?
Yeah, no, I would more say that the right is more resourceful in some ways. Left is logical and linear and structured and ordered, and it's our left perception. And as a society, we're a bit left perception oriented. We like to cut things into orderly pieces and separate out the conditions and context and just say, the ministry has to be left oriented, sort of to the core. Maybe, we lost a few right brains there, because that sort of sense of emotional, relational, connected is, of course, what we've done always so well in literacy. And, we're always struggling now to find balance between that more relational and that more cut up. And ironically, in some ways, that very fragmented is one of the resources we go to in the face of trauma. One of my favorite new neuroscientists, it's somewhere around, is a woman called Bonnie Badenoch, and she is talking entirely about how we think about this whole society as one that causes traumatic reactions and is left shifted in a way that loses relationship. And I think there's a lot in it. So connection. In the face of trauma, in the face of tough experiences, we so easily feel bad, wrong, not belonging. Even if others are trying to tell us we belong and we fit, we can easily feel on the outs. And of course, in our educational environment, what are we doing that is counteracting that? I often think of education in all its forms as like an antidote for violence if we can do it well. And we learned some shitty things from the tough experiences we've had, and our learning environments can offer an antidote. It can be really hard for all of us to be fully in the present. We can't connect if we're not present. And I don't know about you, but I certainly spent much of my life not very present, very dissociative without really realizing it. I think many of us do. A lot of our workplaces sort of almost require that of us, and then we're not fully present in the moment to engage with others. So I love this idea of mindful, because if our mind is full of everything else, we're probably not in the moment, and then we can't connect. And I've just got a little experience for a moment. Well, I think we've just about got time for it. It's the experience of spacing out. So bear with me, it'll be completely annoying. It'll work. We haven't got enough volume, probably. Listen carefully, it will annoy you as it disappears.
If we are particularly excited, scared, or bored, we may find our thoughts relentlessly elsewhere. An experience separating or dissociating may become some reminders of earlier trauma, as well as background fear and anxiety. We may feel hazy, experience blurred vision or hearing, body numbness, leaving the room with birds flying by or cars passing, or a complete gap in time. Pleasurable or terrible. It may lead to panic or difficulty breathing.
You could hardly hear it even at its best, and then it was completely gone at its worst, which was the idea of it. I'm sorry, I would have had an external speaker if I hadn't blanked on it, but you can see it kept fading, flickering out, and for many of us, that is what spacing out can feel like. We thought we were paying attention, but there was a gap. We thought we were paying attention, but I didn't actually hear the last thing you said. Or I thought I was watching it carefully, but I didn't get it written down because suddenly it was gone. And others of you may know that experience. This was actually created by an artist friend of mine in the States, Elaine Seoka Yonioka, who doesn't have her own experiences of trauma, but had intergenerational experiences of trauma as a Japanese American whose parents were in the camps. And this was her attempt to depict what it can feel like. And we may know it ourselves, but it's very easy to forget that may be what's happening when somebody seems a little disconnected. And so creating the space that allows for that reconnecting, that makes it just ordinary, that we might have missed something because we do all space out. And when we name it in advance, it makes it a little easier to admit to. Now, we do also, some of us, take our severed heads to school. This is actually was a little visual creation from somebody who was in a graduate class of mine here that was about learning and violence. And she said, this is what I did. It's a perfect coping strategy. Take your head to school, pretend you have no body, and of course, to some degree it works. I suspect these hallowed halls are populated with many people who took their severed head to school and left the rest behind. And it has a cost. It is not to be advocated. I once spoke about it and somebody said, oh, we should do research about that. That's really helpful. People do well in school when they've done that. And I had to say, no, stop there. It's not a good thing to do when we leave our bodies behind. Our bodies take a toll. That is when we get many illnesses, and more we know many illnesses that are, as the medical people say, dose dependent for the number of adverse experiences we have had. And so we know that actively leaving our bodies behind may get us through school, but not get us through life in the way that we need to. But it's important to pay attention to, because then that reminds us how we disconnect. And so I'm saying connect is the most important thing possible. And unfortunately, I'm also saying the more drastically we need to connect, the more we're likely to fight it off. The more we are likely to say, I'm fine, nothing wrong here, don't need you to connect with me, or all the other ways that we disconnect. And so when you're thinking about those difficult situations of the students you want to work with, some of you I know do work with kids, most of you with adults. We do know, I mean, especially with kids, I think we know that most difficult behavior, the most difficult person to connect with is the one that we really most need to connect with. And it may be challenging. It may be challenging also across our differences and across our own wounds. I have this image, I can't know whether you can really see it well, but it's of two giant cogwheels. Because I often think that with all our own past messes, we get caught against each other like a bunch of cogwheels. We get sort of snagged in because as what upsets each of us can catch. And so instead of connecting well, we're much more likely to connect abrasively, badly, problematically. And so some of your scenarios may have gone in that direction. But when we recognize that we want to connect, but we get hooked, maybe our primary site where we can see that is with our significant others, with those we're closest to, where our vulnerabilities are more up, and then we can be most caught. But I think we see it also with our colleagues and students. So connecting can be a real challenge. I think I won't show you that one. Let's just go straight on with another piece just to talk about the challenge of how connecting to our own future can be difficult. I always laugh really in a bit of despair when I see all these campaigns like the sort of addiction campaigns, drugs, and alcohol, always appealing to sort of the idea of a future. That is all very fine, but if we've experienced trauma and don't believe there will be a future, then that's not really going to get us very far. There was some amazing research in the States where every kid in a community was abducted. And so kids of, a wide range of kids, they were all abducted. They were actually put in a bus that was sort of underground for 24 hours. 2 kids did the work of, along with the driver, of actually digging out. Those kids showed no sign of trauma. All the rest of the kids who had, presumably, as far as could be told, very little other trauma in their lives, a staggering number of them got pregnant in their teens, quit school early, and in their interviews 10 years and 15 years later, they were saying, I don't expect to live to be grown up. That was one experience that they were not hurt other than the shock and horror of being their school. They were all heading off to summer camp and the bus was abducted. But 15 years later, they were still not imagining a future. So it's, I think, really important to understand how that connect to a future can be disrupted. And if we just assume it's there, especially, the sort of goal demanding stuff in adult education now, it's like, what do you mean? What future? And so.
Are you talking about their environments? Right? You're talking about environment.
I'm talking.
It's hard for a child to learn proper education in the environment.
Yes, what I was just actually drawing attention to, though, is the fact that whatever tough experiences we have, they can make it very hard for us even to imagine a future. They can sort of close down the world for us, not just because of the actual experience, but just sort of what our mind does to make meaning out of it.
That's why we need one of us mentors.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. We do always need others who help to sort of believe in us. So that's a good reminder. Thank you. So just the last thing I want to say about connection is, again, to refer to the metaphor, to music, to movement, to the different things that can get us unstuck from ourselves. And then the last thing I wanted to say about connecting is just that instead of the fix it, we had the plate that was the fix it idea. Here's the plate broken up and turned into something completely different. I love mosaic art myself, but I think I also love it mostly for the metaphor that it feels it is, to allow us to sort of open differently, and not be thinking about how we put something together, but how we open it up into new possibility. And I think doing creative work that allows us to experience that can also really help for some of that shift. All right. I was just looking to see if there was anything else I wanted to say about connection. I want to see if anybody has any questions or comments. Yes, perfect.
So I guess I've learned over the years, been a teacher for 20 years, that connecting is difficult. And I think what I take away maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, especially being back in Toronto, working in different places, that it's really important to first look at yourself.
Yes.
Like, what's my lens? What's my culture? What's my attitude? Beautiful. And then I look at the other, and I see where we can maybe bridge the gap, if possible. And sometimes it's not possible. And I learned how to be present. I taught Inuit students for 4 years. It's not always what you say or what you do. It's just being with the other. That's important.
It's beautiful. That being with is a really important piece, that if we can settle ourselves to be with somebody else, then that other person can often settle themselves. And we're going to go on next to talk a little bit more about the brain. Hang on one second. Let's see if anybody else has any comment they want to make about connection, and then absolutely. Yes.
Just as a reflection again, like I often mirror other people's way they're interacting with me. So I've had to be really aware of if I'm projecting something back towards that person, and just really thinking and reshaping those
Beautiful, yes. There's lovely strength about really absorbing somebody else's energy and some really sort of mirroring what they're experiencing. And then there's a downside if it's too much for you, and then also leaves you not sort of fully able to connect because you're not you to connect. I think it's a really important piece that it's like, how are we settled and connected to our own self before we can connect to somebody else? Yes.
Yeah, I find that when I'm in the process, when I'm connecting, I tend to I listen with my heart. I suppose I'm listening with my ears, obviously, but it's with the heart that I'm listening, and that helps to have a stronger connection. And I think the second thing is that everyone has a source of comfort, whatever we use, and I think it's respecting that source of comfort because it's working for them at that time. So those two things.
Lovely. Yes, I think that's really, really a beautiful piece. That piece, again, if we're in fix-it mode, we're not connecting with our heart. We're connecting with this sort of, our analytical brain that's saying, oh, if I think, sort of in the back of our head, even if we're not saying it out loud, it's sort of like, well, you'd just be better if you. But if we're really connecting from that heart
What if people
place,
lost their cultures and their hearts? Like, where are you going to learn that from? Where are you going to get your heart from?
We have to refine it.
There you go, pick up other people's cultures.
And that's
other ways, other healing ways. That
and there's
are not our ways.
Yes, and there's strength and danger in there. It's wonderful to open to other things we're not familiar with, but we also can't appropriate somebody else's version. Great, welcome, come on in, settle.
Thank you, and excuse me.
It's all good. It's wonderful as many people are having to arrive, come at different times and leave at different times and slip back in. So we will assume that everyone is here when they can be, and we'll hope that we can work to as much presence as we can find as we are here. Any last comments about connection?
Yeah, I just think we should have more people of the certain type of, like if you're helping a certain type of people or a population, you should have those types of people in that management level and all those decision-making levels and all that, because and they should be from that community. I'm just saying, like, there's way too many disconnections. You're talking about connections, and we're so disconnected. Yes. I don't know that person. I don't know this person. I barely know her. And I love her. I barely know where she's from. I'm just saying. I'm not going to let her choose what my community needs. Just because she's educated and just because she's smart and brilliant and I like her. But I'm just saying, just because she looks good on paper and blah, 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 she might be the only one that puts it. But I'm just saying, this is like going deep for me.
Yeah, it's great. And that's good.
Great to bring that up. Thank you.
Good.
I'm going to go home and reflect all
It's a
weekend.
good.
I'm going to go out to the community.
Yeah, good.
Put some fire and tobacco out. Sema. We call it Sema in my language.
Perfect.
Which I'm learning right now.
And I mean, good point, Shannon, that it is true. We talk about connection, but we're often very disconnected in so many ways. So, all right. All right. So let's take a breath. Anybody else who hasn't yet spoken? Any last comment? Yeah, Michelle.
I was just feeling very impacted by the first part of this workshop because I'm currently in a psychotherapy training class, and I just admire the work that adult educators are doing in a really connected and heart-filled sense, and doing the work of psychotherapists, educators, of social, and everyone. So I just have a real deepening respect and gratitude for the work that folks are doing. Thank you.
Lovely.
They really don't pay you guys enough.
Sweet.
I'm writing this down.
Good. Write it down. Awesome. All right. I think we're going to go into the next area I want to talk about is conscious awareness. And they're my next C. And I think I'm a little hesitant, but I think I'm going to get us all up on our feet in just a minute. I can imagine I'm going to create absolute chaos, but I think we can handle chaos. I'm just going to say a little bit about what I think of as conscious awareness and why, well, I have to confess, I'm partly using that term because it's another C, but it really, it is, I think, also a really, really important piece that we could describe it in many ways. But what I'm actually thinking about is that awareness we have of what we're doing, what our mind is doing. So if, for instance, we understand more about how and when our mind, our brain goes into fight and flight mode, then we, although we don't have control over that aspect of fight and flight, we can shift how we're engaging with it. So one of the things, I think curiosity and connection are things that literacy workers have done well. I think in our current environment and in our funding environment, those are both quite challenged because we're challenged to frame it often in very rigid ways. We're challenged to have so much of our energy go into very formal reporting rather than lovely, warm, curious engagement. So, but I think those two we have done. I think the piece we haven't done so much yet has been this piece of conscious awareness. And it is one of the things that the neuroscience has really sent me down that road, and then really looking at myself and others that I've been able to do some research with, seeing what a difference it makes when we do have a conscious awareness. When I can say to myself, oh, that's what's going on right now, then I am often able to shift it. And so it's that piece that I think might be the most transformative piece that we could add into how we do our adult literacy work. If we're supporting, not us knowing what's going on, but us supporting others, supporting students to be noticing, oh, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Oh, that's what's arising here. It's that, oh, I've closed down, so I'm not actually really listening. Oh, what got me? What can bring me back? So it's that awareness that I think can be really crucial. So to be able to help others with that awareness, then we've got to be able to teach them some about the brain. And so that's a whole area that our understanding is changing day by day. It can be an area that we feel we know a lot about because it is drawing us, or we can feel a little, I'm not sure I know it myself. Can I help somebody else get it? I particularly love some of Dan Siegel's work. This is another of Dan Siegel's illustrations, because he really helps us talk about the brain in ways that aren't silencing, that aren't full of technical terms that somehow make it turn into something that's less empowering rather than more. He helps us just think about some of the different parts of our brain and how we might want to sort of notice it. His term, because he's often talking about working with children, he has this lovely little sort of scaffolding and the idea of the upstairs and downstairs brain. Now, I must admit, I was teaching in Australia last fall, and I suddenly had people saying, we don't have any upstairs in our houses in this region. And I just have to find a whole other metaphor then if we can't talk about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. So there's always going to be shifts of context and different ways of thinking that will work in different settings. But just having just a little piece of beginning to be aware can be really helpful. And one of the few terms that I think can be useful is the idea of the amygdala. Anybody have been hearing about the amygdala? Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. So that's the piece that does fire. It's a very early part of our brain. It's the piece that does fire when our vagal, our polyvagal nervous system, if you want that word, but you can let it slide by you if you don't. It is what sends us this eruption of what we should do for safety. And I just think it's really important to recognize that that part of our brain, it's not up for our conscious control. And so it can be quite helpful to sort of get, okay, if I'm sort of erupting in anger or feeling there's fight and flight, then something is going on that is making me feel afraid. Something is catching me. And so then we can pause and notice why, or we can help students to pause. So I think rather than just talking while we sit, I'm actually going to get us to move along a continuum. I think we've got a nice corridor down there that we can play with for just to get us up on our feet, everybody up on their feet and moving. There's a few people who haven't moved yet, so I'm going to get us all moving. And before you move though, you can get on your feet, but don't move yet. We're going to just try with a continuum. Now it's just a fun and quick continuum. So at this end, towards the window, we're going to go down the corridor, towards the window, not too far down the corridor, we might disturb faculty that are too far. Not a lot, just a few down there. So we can go a little ways down. Down this end, we're going to put ourselves, if we feel we know lots about the brain already. And there's lots of things we've been quite excited about already. And a little ways down if we feel it's all a bit new and I got more questions than answers. And you'll need to talk to each other to decide where you're going to put yourself, because really it's going to be sort of almost a line, maybe a lot of clusters. So move that end if you feel you've got lots of things you might want to share about how wonderful the brain was. Let's see how far we'll go.
Right now, I'm reaching around. This is something we've been already.
No, this isn't even my rule about it.
I know. You know me, I don't follow the rules. You know I don't follow the rules.
That's why I can pound you. This is good brain cell. Awesome. Sorry, I have no hands to shake it, but welcome. Come on out. Join in. We just. I need to louder. We need a pause for a moment. It was a glorious buzz, of course, but I noticed there's a very big crowd down this end. And Terrell!
Sorry, my coworker.
Okay.
So there was lots of positioning yourself based on whether you felt you had lots of questions about the brain, or whether you had some areas about it you were really excited. I see there's not folks right up there, a million and one things they've been learning, which is where I feel like I've been over the last 2 years. I got really digging into the neuroscience because really, to be honest, because people weren't listening to me about how I felt we had to put the impact of violence together with learning. People would say, or my favorite hate was, I don't have any students who've been through violence. I don't have unmotivated students.
Sergeant. Sorry, whatever that word is.
Yes. So I felt like I needed to know more of the science to be able to argue why it was important. So what I want to hear from you is a little bit about what are questions you have, and they could be anywhere down. Or also what's something you've learned about the brain that you think is helpful for others to learn. So let's start with a question from down that end. What's a question that you folks had about the brain that you're curious about? Anybody?
We were trying to figure out what it was looking for.
Oh,
And one of us
interesting.
said water, one of us said muscle, and one of us said fat, and we're all in the same area.
Yep.
And then we know a little bit.
You're all wrong.
Actually, you're all right.
Oh!
So, absolutely. And it is the part of our body that uses the most of our energy. And so it's a real, when I forget what it is, it's something like 80% of our fuel is used by our brain. And I made up that figure because I looked at it. So never trust if I tell you a number. No, I made it. 25% of your daily calories? Oh, I'm sure I read more than that. But you sound like you might be a numbers person, so we'll hold on that possibility.
You just made it up too.
But we do know, I mean, it does remind us why we, yes, look it up, absolutely. It does remind us of why we need good fuel, and we do need water to make our brains work. Any other questions from down at end? No, but there was a glorious buzz, of course.
Can an adult's brain change?
What's that?
Can an adult's brain change?
Yes. You know, the incredible thing is that more and more the research is showing that it is true that in the first few years of life we create the scaffolding in our brain, but throughout our life our brain is changing. And in some ways, the interesting thing is to recognize the plasticity of our brain, the changing brain. It changes every time we learn a new thing. Like it is always changing. But in some ways, that question about changing feels like it's a much bigger question, which is, can we really change majorly? And the answer is absolutely. The things we need to be able to change are oxygenated blood to the brain. So one of the reasons as we age, our brains often slow down in changing is because physically we are less able to oxygenate our brains as much. So if we're not still doing strong exercise, we will oxygenate our brains less. They will create less neuroconnections. If we continue to oxygenate our brain, if we continue to have good food and water and air, and the stimulation that causes new neurons to fire, then yes, our brain changes faster when all our cells are growing, but as our cells continue to grow and change to the day we die.
What age till you die, right? Now they're saying like, yo, we're all 30 and we're all youth now, you know? Come on, man, I just missed it by 2 years then.
Oh, well, that's it. Then you're done for.
I know.
All right.
What, am I dumb now? My brain's not gonna grow?
Our brains grow till
we
the
die.
day we die,
Just
whatever
like our
that is.
feet.
All right, there was something from this end. Yes.
Yeah, just kind of an example on how much our brains can change.
Beautiful.
They've done studies where people who have normal sight go in and they fold them for a few days, and they've done MRIs before, during, and after. And the brain, the part of the brain that controls your sight actually gets smaller. And the part of the brain that controls all the other different sensors actually gets bigger. And that's only over a few days. So it's like your brain changes a lot.
That's a lovely, lovely example. I love the idea that our brain is like contested real estate. I'll have that bit. No, I want that bit. No, I need that bit. And really, that's how it works.
Also, can you not control the power of your brain? Like, can you not like slow down the fact that I'm gonna get blind in 2 days?
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna eat more carrots?
Yes.
That's right. No, for example, I'm getting hearing aids, and they're based on the concept that they will trigger different parts of the brain to change and make me more able to hear. I can hear you right now. But they literally are, and they do. They change the whole process of how your brain is working and what parts you're using and stimulating.
Exactly.
Nice. Those are
And we know that
ears. Give me them.
different parts of
this one.
Hang on, Shannon. We know that different parts of the brain can be used. Some of the research that's shown where kids born with only one half the brain, the other half does take up all the functions that would normally be in that first half.
Do you believe
so we know an enormous amount of change can happen. And the issue that we haven't yet spoken to as to what allows that change to happen, beyond the things I already said, is the conditions, the environment that makes that possible. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, and I will let you sit down again in a minute, but I do like standing up for changing the orientation of our blood flow and so on. Just before we go and sit down though, any more questions or comments?
Just memory.
Yes.
Memory and that part.
Oh, the incredible thing about memory, I have had the most beautiful conversations with literacy students about memory, because once we start talking about the impact of violence, often people will say, I think my memory was damaged. And one of the things I've found is that when we can talk about it, we can see that actually we all have very different aspects of memory. Often we do. Traumatic experiences aren't encoded in quite the same way as others, so we may have blanks in our memory. So that may also mean we have blanks for particular things we're learning. It's a wonderful conversation with students who realize, and with folks who were working with students who had blanked out a period of childhood. It's like, I think I learned to read when I was a kid, but I don't know it anymore. So that understanding that we can actually lose all sorts of memory because it is associated with memory that was too difficult. And so there's that. There's also, I think what's really interesting is noticing that when we've had tough experiences, we often have very different sort of memories. I went through school thinking I was absolutely stupid because I could not remember all the disembodied facts that we had general knowledge tests in every single week. I thought I would have terrible memory. And then at one time I was interviewing, we were in a group of a panel were interviewing folks. And when we were discussing it afterwards, I said, oh, this happened, and then this happened, and then you said that, and he said this, and you said, and the other sort of looked at me and said, what? And I realized that my memory worked more like a video camera. So I could either catch the video camera rolling, and I could tell you all sorts of foolish things like what you were wearing 10 years ago, because I could rerun that bit of video. But if you asked me for numbers or disembodied fact, you could tell it to me. 5 minutes later, I've forgotten it. And I've talked to a lot of literacy learners who've often said that's the sort of memory they have.
Or traumatic
That's the
people.
what?
So
That's the what?
that is the sort of memory they have, that they will often feel like, and sometimes feel like even that times where they were triggered and it's almost like they left, but they left the video camera running. So there's no emotion present because you were too absent, too unable to be present. But you could still say, but he said this and she said that, and they were wearing this. And so memory, we often judge thinking we've got bad memories. Many students will say, I've got a terrible memory. But often if we talk about it more, we can find the ways in which memory is working and different things are happening. So that often the forgetting is because there's anxiety attached. And there's one of the pieces that I feel is really useful, is understanding more about how all of our automatic responses to fear can close down different parts of our brain. So we'll go back for that. But any more just burning with of questions or comments? Let's go back to spaces then. You might even try and find a new place just to see the world from a different angle.
Ooh, look at the pretty scarves you have there too.
Why are we doing way there? What the hell?
Yes. Space. Awesome.
Pink.
All right. Tea gone. So I have a tea as well. And a tall tea mug, blue tea mug floating somewhere around this room. Can anyone see it? No, that's my water bottle, and I finished that already.
Is this a tall tea mug?
No, that's not me.
Nope. That's yours, sorry.
Oh, well. Ah, there it is. See, I knew it hadn't gone far. It's having a visit with was having a visit with those 2-bite brownies that I can't eat, but you know.
Why can't you eat it?
Because I can't eat gluten. But there were many things that were gluten-free. I made sure of that. All right. So I just want to bring us back. Thank you for that. That was lovely to get a little bit of movement, a little bit of energy. This is like me in numbers that are a little made up usually. But I'll promise you the overall neuroscience is not made up. And this sort of graph is like an imaginary graph, but it's a very real state that it's trying to find a way of showing. So if we're hoping that our brains will change, or those we're supporting, brains will change to learn new things, to be able to settle in the room, they need to be in this middle area. So the middle area, we can call it all sorts of things. Many of the neuroscientists have actually some lovely words for it. My favorite is the sweet spot. I think that is actually one of the brain neuroscientists one of his books is floating around, Louis Cozzolino. And I think sweet spot is a lovely, lovely way of thinking about it. One we can talk with students about, are you in that sweet spot where you can learn? And we can really notice what makes it not the sweet spot. So it's not the sweet spot when we are up in chaos, when we're absolutely all abuzz, All a buzz might be our beginnings or our middle of our fight-flight reactions, all that buzzy, chaosy place. We can often end up there. Just being in a room like this or being in a classroom can activate that fight-flight stuff. This was talking to some upgrading students to get all these different words. People said it felt like it was chaos, it's too noisy in their head to learn, had racing thoughts, impulsive, defensive, reactive, angry, overwhelmed, overloaded, panic, hypervigilant, unsafe, acting out. And of course, the very formal term for it is chronic hyperarousal. But we don't really need the formal terms. I think however we want to describe it is fine. Dan Siegel does work with kids talking about flipping our lid. And when our brain becomes disconnected, we flip our lid. Lovely way of being able to talk about it, especially with kids.
So how many diagnoses are under that? Bipolar?
Oh, they could be, yes, they could be many diagnoses, but you remember I said we'll put the diagnosis sort of on one side, because all those are patterns that come out of the conditions that shaped our brains. So they can be helpful. They may be useful in different ways, but they also just describe states that we can move in and out of where it can be harder to learn. That's our first line of defense. When we get anxious, when we get stressed, when we are literally afraid of our lives, anywhere in there, the first line of defense is fight and flight, as most of us know now. But we often forget, I think, that just that sort of pissy, angry feeling can be that it's just a little bit of fight activated. And maybe if we sort of pause a moment, we'll see what activated it, and we might be able to shift it.
How come you're talking about freeze?
You're one beat ahead of me.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going, no, it's good. I'm going, good to move me along. Let me get me down here. So down here is our next line of defense. If we can't go to fight or flight, we can go, and it's not that we actively choose. Amygdala, the unconscious part of our system, tries to keep us alive. So it goes to fight and flight. If it can't go to fight or flight, especially if we are small and vulnerable, especially if whatever is there is way, way too big for us, whatever that is, then we go to freeze. We can even go further down than freeze to complete and utter system shutdown that just about stays alive. We can go down and down and down to keep our system functioning. And in that place too, there's no plasticity in our brain. So we may like a quiet room with everybody seeming very quiet and well behaved, but if it's at the cost of freeze, which many of us, if we've gone to freeze over and over and over again as little mites because nobody was able to there to soothe us, then we may go there at the slightest anxiety. And so then we have no plasticity to learn. So if you had students that you were thinking about who get stuck, or you yourself get absolutely stuck, then the issue is, what are we going to do to get to this place? We'll talk a little more about it.
Can I add a fun fact?
Go for it.
I talked to an elder, like I'm from Manitoba, and he added like another F word. It was like fun or like funny. Because like a lot of times, Anishinaabe people in here, I know, like a lot of times when like trauma happens, we'll laugh, we'll make a joke out of it.
Yes, yes.
So instead of fighting, flighting, freezing, we'll just laugh, right? Like I remember telling somebody that their kid was dead, and she just laughed. And like I was in child and family services, right? And I was good old I had a kid, and the kid died because put a birth alert on her, and the kid died like 24 hours later. We told the parents, and they just started laughing and laughing and laughing, and like it freaked me out. So I was like 21, right? a long time ago, and anyways, I was just like, I understand it though, you know, I really understand, like, I used to see my family hurt me and they laugh at it, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Thank you.
a lot of
It's a useful,
elders, yeah, put another F in there,
yeah, it's a useful piece to add in because it is,
cultures.
and you can see the ways in which it can be just a release of tension when we laugh. It can feel inappropriate. Often people get in legal situations when people laugh, it gets judged as meaning you weren't as seriously hurt. So it's a useful piece to add in. And you also already said something about this little piece. This is another diagram. This is actually is trying to speak to all of the what we often label as disorders, but it's also trying to look at the idea of mental health. And the idea is, it actually originally was Dan Siegel's idea of a drawing, except I didn't like his drawing, so somebody, a wonderful colleague and friend, Susan Tiernan, did a different version for us so that it was neither race nor class nor gendered, the being in the boat. But the idea that, in fact, mental health is that we recognize we have some degree of control, we have our paddles, but we are also in the flow of the river. And in the flow, we can feel okay about what comes up. We can feel we can navigate it. We can feel we can move through it. But we can easily get snagged on either side. And on one side, there is the snag of rigidity and control. And we can certainly, I'm sure, think of either ourselves or others who, when they get anxious, go to that place of trying to control us and everything else in the environment. There's that rigidity and control when it gets too much, too scary. And the other one is chaos and overwhelm. And we can slide there. And all of the things that we do give labels to of diagnosis really fit into one or other side of those, or a flip between the two. But we all get snagged there at times. The issue is just, do we get snagged there and can't find our way out? Or do we, in some amount of time, find our way back into the flow? And I like this image too, because it's also another one I feel we can share, because again, we can then notice, and students can notice for themselves, am I getting caught in one or other place? You know, when you sometimes have that place, but am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to have this notebook? Am I supposed, and you know that's sort of fear taking somebody into rigidity and control. I got to get a hold on it. Or the other, the first person who comes with, loses their book every time. And, it's just a mess of chaos. And some of us, I think, will probably notice we go more to one side or the other. I'm certainly really good on the overwhelm and chaos side of it. And I have a colleague I used to work with for many years who was really strong on the control. As long as we didn't judge each other, we were quite a good compliment for each other as we worked. But if we got too vulnerable, then we easily felt bad and wrong. But if we can notice, oh, that's my pattern, how can I get back into the flow? It can make it a little easier. And so if we're working with students to help them notice getting back in the flow, that can be really helpful. All right, what else did I really, really, really want to say? I don't want to talk too much. Oh, I do just have to say this. When we can name things, it shifts the feeling. So Name It to Tame It again is a Dan Siegel piece. It's a very nice, simple, we can easily say it to each other, but it captures that whole idea that once we can get across to our left brain, give something some language, it loses some of its emotional heat. It loses some of that past heat. So when we're, really all activated by something that's caught our old stuff, caught our vulnerabilities, if we can name, that's what's going on, we can feel the difference. I was teaching down at George Brown on Monday. It's an environment I am not familiar with. I had to negotiate the technology. It was all I did was say to the students, this is not my home. You're just about to graduate, it's your home. I may need some help from you because as I feel wrong and my brain won't work so well. And I could feel my own system settle down in naming it. Because we think we'll do better if we hide it. We hide our anxiety rising, but in fact, the only way we can cope with it, we then sort of leave. Whereas if we lean in and name it, then we become more present. And if we support others to name it, it becomes so much easier. So we've talked about fight, flight, freeze, the aroused system, the activated system. And one last thing, there's a book here actually about the polyvagal nervous system. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure he writes in English. I think he thinks he does, but I'm not sure he does. But it's lovely, lovely stuff, actually helping us to see really what the brain is doing. How is it doing this shifting process as it goes into alert mode? And one really useful piece that, it is this vagal system that gets us into fight and flight and freeze. But it's also the system that has us surveying our environment to see if everybody is friend or foe. And when we've gone into alert mode, everybody is foe. Everybody is enemy. And so it's, again, then very hard to connect. And I don't know about you, but I think we see that often, like in this society and also in our groups. And if we can settle the nervous system, then we can come back out of that. Everybody's an enemy, everybody's looking at me funny, everybody's seeing me wrong, sort of, everybody's judging me sort of mode. And knowing that that's what our brain is doing and that it was meant to do that because it's supposed to keep us alive. We had to figure out who is friend and foe, and we still have to figure out who's friend and foe. But we don't always have all the ways to do it. So I want to move just quickly in a moment or two into the condition.
Oh, no.
It's all right.
I'm just talking about it. I was saying, maybe you want a foe as a friend.
Maybe.
Oh, maybe. I'm just being malicious.
So one thing we need to do is use up fight and flight energy, where our bodies are coursing with energy. Teenagers are in fight flight mode with enough adrenaline that they could lift a car, that they could fly across, race faster than they'd ever imagined possible. And we say, sit still. And then we wonder why things go wrong and of ourselves. So we use up that fight and flight energy. We freeze, we have to come back to the present. And there are really simple things we can do. We can use that modeling clay, even if it does make our hands sticky. We can fiddle with our pipe cleaners. We can even just rub our hands on our thighs or rub one hand on the next hand. It helps us come back to the present. And if we know that, then it's easier to do that. So why are we not teaching every group of students about that? Because otherwise, we're trying to learn, they're trying to learn, but not in the place where the brain will change. So that's just how will we help to come back to the present? So just lastly, on that sense of conscious awareness, we can really play with recognizing how the mind is working, what allows us to settle, because our job is to create the conditions where the brain can change. Any questions or comments before we go on to the conditions? I'll let you do something again in just a moment. Onyx, your hands. All right. Ooh. Any comments about the brain? Things you wished I was going to say something. Yes.
I just had a quick question. I know you reference Dr. Siegel a lot.
Yes.
And I'm pretty familiar with his work, but other than his book Mindsight, is there another one that you could make reference?
Yes, I actually love The Whole Brain Child. It's aimed at just the developing brain of the child, but it's a lovely, clear, easy read about our brain.
I use a hand model often.
There you go.
It doesn't matter if it's my 1.5-year-old. I've used it with the learners that we work with
Brilliant.
when they're in their teens. So.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I like that a lot. For teens, there's also his book Brainstorm. And for for parents, especially of young kids, there's Parenting from the Inside Out, which is lovely. So and one of the things that's nice, the reason I often reference him is not that his work is any more brilliant than some of the others, but he is very approachable. He writes in a way with a lot of metaphor, with a lot of play. And so that's why his stuff often ends up visually there for me. So, good. All right. Whoa, we have just a little bit that I'm going to set you thinking again. So we've got to create the conditions that will support learning. If we know that we've got to get to that place, we know that in our institutions of education, they're not conditions for learning. About every 3 seconds, there is something huge that they do that is not the conditions for learning. I go with a little chosen grandson to his school in the morning, and he and I both vibrate in sort of fear, firstly, just to get there at the right moment, or he'll be in big trouble, which terrifies him, or we will get there as that loud buzzer goes, and I can feel his body vibrate. He is not somebody who's been through trauma himself, but his parents and grandparents and great-grandparents all had horrendous experiences of violence. And I find it fascinating to see it. There is lots of evidence about how trauma passes intergenerationally, but I find it fascinating to see that the tiniest things set his nervous system going. And in institutions, we have buzzers and intercoms and disconnects that are really problematic for kids who've experienced trauma. And I love this concept. I often have plants in my pictures just to capture that idea. We do not blame the lettuces when they're not growing well. We don't say, just smarten up and behave better. You just should. We actually look at the lettuces that aren't growing well and say, oh, I'm not giving them the right conditions to thrive. And so I just like that silly reminder that we spend half our time criticizing people when it's actually the conditions that make the difference. And just to go back to that silly book, that I don't mind dragons this size. Why did it have to grow so big? I'm not sure, says Billy, but I think it just wanted to be noticed. And that is the really key. I apologize for this very old book with its white family, but it does just capture that. It's ridiculous dragon. That is down to real small size. So we all need to be heard and seen and taken account of when the nervous system fires up. We have to feel safe for it to calm down again. So how safe do people really feel in your context? And what might you be able to change that create conditions where nervous systems can relax? I love this image because it feels like it's sort of beyond what any of us might, when could we just curl up and go to sleep, balanced somewhere? And what are the conditions that we might be able to create? So I want to get you in just a second. So many situations can feel too stimulating. They can just be too much. So some sort of middle ground, like those two, of course, were kids' ones, but I have worked with the comfy chair in the corner and found it absolutely remarkable what it offers as a haven for jangled nervous systems. Comfy chair and a big quilt is transformative.
When you're teaching adults, though, it's mostly computers sometimes, right? So you got to make sure everyone's in the same room in the computer. You should have that kind of environment.
But, yes, and in that environment, we may not be able to learn. And so absolutely, we get pushed into environments that seem to make sense for the thing we're trying to learn, and they may not feel safe. They may put people too close together. They may put the teacher leaning over a shoulder. That is absolutely triggering. And so thinking about how do we work with that? And it's not that we can create an environment that is safe in all moments. We can be triggered by the quality of light, a particular smell. There is no 100% safe environment. What we can do is make thinking about safety something that we can all talk about. It's reasonable to talk about it. It's not something that, oh, you have a problem, we're going to treat you special. It's we all need to talk about it. We will all try to balance everybody's needs to create safety. Exactly. So we can all be soothed by different things. We can all create safety for ourselves and support it for each other. We may want to have our own little kits that help us to find soothing, calming moments. All right. So your challenge now is to go back to those early scenarios and say, if you were to take a learning and balance stance to that scenario, or something else, if something else has come up now, what would bringing curiosity, connection, conscious awareness, and safer conditions for learning shift? Is there any shift you might be able to bring that just shifts that angle? So now I'll stop talking at you and give you time to muse again, talk to each other, move and get yourself anything you need, but just think a little bit with what it would look like. I think I have the assignment.
What's to make your place better?
No, I didn't actually write that one up. Yeah, what will make it better? What will you take on that are taking on using a learning and balance stance?
When we are correctly. What's going on here? Like, I'm not sure what's going on. Can you help Yes, she's an actress.
Contact
You named it, you shared it, and I'm feeling you're aware of your experience both of you are
I felt
No, but the idea is I was always crazy. I was going to have
You do need the open edges, it's not always those. Sometimes they can be a real richness about I also want to say
It's like you're sitting in the
Not enough as far as I'm concerned. Some do. I mean, I can work with experts. When they've got sort of from teachers, way more than and then just don't have someone to forget. And there's a very strong emphasis on mental health rather than on mental problems. What I say, let's just say it's about all of our lives rather than all right.
So I had to learn
I don't find myself.
The more you can understand what the space is out and what leads into space out, the more you feel ready to come back. Because it is a habit as well as a need. And so I really explore and really value the brilliance of our show. Amazing buzz. I always have this tension in a shorter workshop as we go backwards and forwards between working in small groups and pairs and whole group. Feeling like, because I can't lean in on everybody, so really I wish we could have the discussion in a whole group. On the other hand, I really love that there's such an amazing crew here to be willing to explore this together. So I am curious, which is to see, I realized actually I put together two tasks. I had two tasks I was going to separate out, and in my little bit of anxiety of, will we get through to the end? I really wanted to respect that we had set a 4:30 stopping time. Folks are welcome to stay and continue to talk past that, but I wanted to respect the time we had put out. And so I was getting a little anxious, but there were actually two tasks I was going to do. We wouldn't have had time for both, but I want to just name the other one, which was, I was going to ask before we moved into how might a learning balance stance shift anything that you were taking on. I was going to ask a last task at the end of conditions to say, I invite you to reflect a little bit on your own conditions and the ways in which it feels safe and inviting and possible even to create conditions that are really supportive for you to experiment, to be curious and connect and have conscious awareness about what your own brain is doing as well as what students' brains are doing. And I know that in general, our conditions aren't usually conducive to that. And so I was going to go a little bit to a reflection on those conditions before you went to whether you might, where you might shift the stance. So I want to just open up for a few minutes around either reactions to either question. Is there any insights you had about where you might bring in a learning and balance stance, or questions you had about, given what I'm doing or my setting, it's really hard to bring a learning and balance stance? And that's why the two feel like they come together a little bit. Our conditions, as you know, can be conditions that it's very hard to do something, even little things, different from how we've always done them. And so feel free to just call out anything in relation to either of those.
Oh, we talked about how creating a safe space in the classroom is more than just using words or putting a sticker that says safe space.
Yes.
It's an ongoing process of checking in with your learners and yourself, and kind of just trying to feel things out as you go, like deciding whether or not something is an appropriate thing to do that day based on the sort of feeling in the room. And
yes.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important. There's no, oh, it's now safe, and there's no, oh, it's simple, we can just say it's safe, so therefore it is, which is often what we have a tendency to do.
Right, which is even more harmful in a way.
Exactly. It's true, actually. It's a very good point, because I do think one of the toughest things often is that where it feels like there's a misfit between what we say and what we do. And I think for many of us, our past traumas can sort of really connect to that. I was actually just sort of chuckling to myself as I was riding here down the bike lane, which, everybody else occupies whenever it suits them. Yeah. And I was realizing I was getting really angry. And I suddenly thought, oh, yes, it's like the promise that this is space where I will be safe. And in reality, it's space where everything else will happen. There's huge potholes, there's cars stopping in front of me, there's people walking out, and so there was that sense of anger rising about, you lied to me, it's not safe. And I think that's a really useful point, that is often a really triggering thing. So don't say this is a safe space. Instead, say together, how much safer can we make it? And there's a real difference in that, because then there's not a lie. We're doing what we can together to make it as safe as we can. And we can be, as you say, regularly check in about what's still not safe. I worked with a bunch of adult educators throughout New England who were part of a research project to try different things. And one group actually had the group say it felt safe once they locked the door and turned off the phone. And then they said, now I feel I can relax. And the teachers were fascinated because they said, I would have thought locking the door would feel really unsafe. I'm not sure I'd choose that. But the students said once the door was locked, they had this sort of, So it's very interesting. I think different things for different people. Does the door wide open feel safer for somebody because then I can slip out whenever I choose? Does the door closed feel safer for somebody else? No one can come in and surprise me. But when we're having that conversation, we are creating something different. And that's what I think is so key. Whereas often we think as facilitators, it's just my job to do it, rather than actually to bring it to the challenge of all of us to try to create that, with the recognition that our needs will conflict. And so how are we going to negotiate that? I need to be able to get up all the time, one student may say, and another will be, you're getting up all the time is disturbing me. All right, both are acceptable. What will we do? And that challenge will settle nervous systems when we really grapple with it. Even though often it may feel like we don't get wonderful answers, but somehow engaging with it is safer. And so that's the big piece for me. What else? What else? Who wants to add? What else came up? Questions, thoughts? What's there for you as you think, is there anything I'm going to do differently as a result of this session? It was sort of fun, or it was sort of hot, or sort of boring, whatever it was. Is there anything I'm taking away from it that I might use? Is there a question that I want to ask or a comment I might make that would make it more useful?
I think just to come back to your earlier point about noticing. Because I think it's helpful for us to kind of leave today and think, oh, I'm going to be doing something now because of people here. But and talk about it as in reflecting, practitioners reflect. So I think the doing is, if nothing else, just noticing.
Yes, yes.
We use phrases around our table like part of, as an educator, well, for me, I feel like it's actually our responsibility to know the connections between violence and learning and to notice them. And one way I do it is to, basically, it's kind of a crude way, but I like the saying because it reminds us that learning is through our senses, is to take a smell of the room.
Yes.
To take a sniff of who's there, what's going on energy-wise, and know what to say or attend to. You don't even need to use, today we're going to talk about safe space. What you attend to when you're listening and you're sort of sniffing out where people are at. And know that there's always a power
differential between you, the educator, you will always have more power. You have the most power. You have the most obligation.
Beautiful. Anyone else, especially anyone anywhere we haven't heard from, anything you want to add or ask or the whole room would benefit by? Yeah.
So I'm not an educator. I'm coming from the public libraries sphere thinking. And it's really interesting applying all these takeaways to the library environment. And something that's really struck me is because the library, it's really, it's foundationally, the original idea was like, it's solo learning, have a book and go and teach yourself. But we do have programming and user education classes and things like that. But what's really struck me is the importance of creating a welcoming environment and a supportive environment, and also building rapport. Because I think in branch, I think the reference desk can be a place can be rather intimidating for people. And so, yeah, it's just really making me think about the importance of in small interactions. If someone asks me, for the washroom key, that's an opportunity to just like show that I'm friendly and I'm here to help them. I'm probably the only public library person here, so I'll try not to sidetrack too much. But my branch, pardon?
Very relevant. You meet a lot of people.
That's right. Yeah.
Public people.
My branch head at the branch I work at has a story about this person who was sleeping in the library a lot, but she kind of built a rapport with him, and he was unemployed and he was living in the little ATM spot in front of the bank, and but she like helped him build a resume, and eventually he got a job, and he's like, I'm not gonna be able to come to the library anymore because I've got that job now, and he like came in and said thanks, and oh, such a touching story. She's so great, that French head. But it's just really, yeah, I'm really making a connection there, thinking about like, it's so easy to kind of be afraid of people in the library, being like, oh, they're not really following the rules, they're sleeping in the library, what else will they do? But to kind of extend that warmth and kind of friendship, that feeling collegiality, I think can make a difference.
Yeah, I think that was useful also, that last little example you gave of what else might they do? Because I think so much we respond out of fear, and not even fear about what's happening in this moment, but that it's sort of the beginning of a slippery slope of trouble in some ways. And so we better sort of nip it in the bud now. We have those sorts of images, and so that sense of trying to open and lean towards and explore and be curious feels like it really changes things. Any other last? Yes.
I'm curious, all these principles are important for learning anything for anybody.
Yes.
And even more important when we've experienced violence.
Yes.
So can you comment a little bit on how it's super important in this context, but is it happening everywhere to support learning?
You would have thought so. I often say that everything we're talking about when we really turn towards acknowledging how violence impacts learning, everything that we might try doing is really just fundamentally good education, which is good for everybody. So we don't have to try and figure out, oh, have you experienced, oh, you haven't experienced, oh, we're not needing to diagnose, and yet it's amazing how often we go back to but how will I know who's experienced violence? As educators, often there's that sort of reaction. But so we don't need to do that. It is good education for everybody, but it's often life-saving education when we've been experiencing trauma and when we otherwise are going to feel stupid, unable to learn. I often used to call my workshops bad, wrong, stupid, don't belong, because in some ways that is that feeling of not feeling like you belong in that place. And if we're carrying on with sort of education as usual, that's what many people will learn, is that I don't belong, that I can't learn, that it's not for me. Whereas we can do it differently. So, yes, we're almost out of time. So just going to say just a last couple of things. The last couple of silly kids book pieces were this idea that, so this is a story. If some of you may come across it, it's an Australian story of Alexander's outing. The ducklings go out with their duck parents for a walk, and one of the ducklings falls down a very deep hole, and it's a very big problem. So they keep trying to figure out which experts will solve the problem. So they're calling in everybody, and finally a kid has a brilliant idea, which is that everybody could go get cupfuls of water, all the people, all the ducks, everyone can go get water. Little, they might only be able to carry a tiny bit in their duck bill, but they will float the duckling out of the hole. And of course, it works, and the duckling floats to the surface. And I love that metaphor, because when things are really big problems, we're convinced we need really big solutions. And we probably need really big experts who aren't us. They're somewhere else. There's somebody out there who's got the answer to fix the problem. And the more anxious we are about it and the bigger the problem seems, the more we think we've got to find the big solution. And with the impacts of trauma, our anxiety sends us out there to somebody else, when actually what we need is all of us doing tiny things. It is because it's the engagement and the connection that's going to make the biggest difference. We so have a tendency to diagnose and send somebody out of the room, literally and metaphorically out of the picture, when actually it's the inclusion that's going to be what's needed, because that impact is so often about bad, wrong, stupid, don't belong. Well, send me away and I'm going to feel even more bad, wrong, stupid, not belonging, even if you think you were doing it for the very best of reasons. So I do think it's the small things that you already are doing that you barely count because they don't seem like they're quite enough, and the more small things that you might be able to just shift a little bit and do more of. So I am going to leave it pretty much there. You're already thinking about that. I do have to just add this thought, which is that when we do anything different, when we take on a new approach, we may leave others behind. And I do love this quote. They will say that you are on the wrong road if it is your own. And so I just really invite more of that exploration, that sort of sense of just because it's how we've always done it, maybe it isn't the way we want to do it now. Hang on just a second, Shannon. Let's see if anybody else has a last comment. Yeah?
All right, I work with great people, mostly Indigenous.
Uh-huh.
It's the community I choose to work with. What if they don't have a lot of these? Like,
don't have a lot of what?
Jenny Horseman, seriously? You know BoJack Horseman, that TV show?
Are you changing the subject?
Yeah, because I already forget what I was just supposed to say.
Okay, hold it, and you and I will talk later, because I think there's something important you're getting at,
yes, and
that we probably haven't got enough time for at this moment, but we'll talk, okay?
And exchange emails, maybe?
Yes. All right. So I'm running out of time, but I want to make sure that I need your help. I have two websites. We're beginning to rebuild learning and violence. I have jennyhorseman.com. I get very lonely out there. I stop believing that anybody has any interest in this issue. And so stay in touch, connect, sign up. Write for learningandviolence.net. We're inviting dispatches from the front lines of everybody's workplace as you explore a learning and violence stance. We're eager to have people share their reflections and put them on our in our resource collection. We will only build that site if we build it collaboratively. So I want to invite you to join me as we continue on this, and maybe there can be further conversations that we find a way to do there's a learning cafe that we're trying to put up more material online. We had a big debate about this, whether we wanted a face-to-face workshop or something online. I was very glad to be invited to do it face-to-face, and I can see it had certainly appealed to enough people that it was well worth doing it face-to-face. But we didn't know what people want, what feels overwhelming in this world these days, and what feels helpful. But it would be lovely to know what else you would like to study. I feel like I've compressed a whole lot into a short afternoon. There's a video up there that is illustrated by Susan Tiernan where some of the illustrations I stole for today. So I wanted just to acknowledge her and just to end that sense around an invitation to carry on that curiosity and connection. So, I have a last, dear me, I'm almost forgetting. So we're finishing up. I don't know whether you prefer to fill in an evaluation here and now or one online in the future, so I'm giving you a choice. I will put together a Survey Monkey and bug you all, because I have your emails, or you can just fill in a quick paper one here, so your choice. But I'm also going to send around something for you to help yourself to pick a stone or a glass piece or a puzzle piece or a angel card. Just pick one for yourself to take, and I'll tell you afterwards. You can look or not look. You're not looking. Okay, but pass it on around the room as fast as you can, if you would, as we finish up. And I will tell you why. So anybody else, any last words you want to say as we're finishing up? Anybody?
Thank you.
Good. Thank you all for spending your Friday afternoon with me and giving me new energy.
I think it was wonderful that I believe everybody in the room probably uses a lot of these things because they're very dedicated. But it's a great reminder to hear them all in one workshop, and then you can go back and say, oh, I need to do more of this or try that. So I do think
I agree. It's not rocket science. It's not dramatically new. It is how we put it together as a whole stance to keep saying, oh, did I slide away from curiosity? Oh, folks are behaving in ways that are driving me nuts. What's going on with the conditions I'm offering? So the more we can keep coming back to those questions is really, really helpful.
You know what I would love to see? If this was actually implemented into the work that we all do.
Ah, good. I hope to see that too. I like that.
So many workshops like this, and like, baby, I want to see it now.
All right, I'm with you. Me too.
Well, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yes. All right, one last second. So what's going around the room is a basket with angel cards, puzzle pieces, and little glass stones. And I'm encouraging you to take one. You could take more than one if you want to. Yes, to take away with you. And it's to remind you, no, not these things.
Oh,
the little basket that's on its way around.
I just went through your secret box.
That's a good thing. I'm encouraging you to take one of those things just to remind you to keep that curiosity and connection as you go along. Maybe the puzzle piece, you want a word on it, or maybe the glass piece just goes in your pocket and reminds you to try and keep seeing from a different angle. So that's what it's there for, just to a little piece to take away with you from this workshop besides the ideas. So thank you, everybody. Yes, Yvonne.
Hi, everyone. Jenny is a lot kinder than I am because she really is. I just want to give a heads up that this is part of a deliverable of MTML to MTCU. And those who know MTCU, I don't have to tell you that SWET returns on their deliverables. So while Jen is going to give you an online survey, we're actually going to send you a survey by word. Michelle will be sending it out. And we really would like, we'll get some input from Jenny on it, and we would like your feedback. And like Jenny, I know where most of you live. I know your agency, so I'm not afraid to walk up to the door and ask for the survey. Okay. I just want to say thank you. This is an awesome turnout. We had one last week in York Region, and we had a good turnout there as well. And people are still emailing and saying how great they are. Like, I'm a disciple of Jenny. From the time I heard this work, I was sold. She doesn't have to sell me. I'm glad that you're here. I'm happy to see you here. Jenny spoke about new beginnings. MTML, as you know, has gone through some difficult times over the years. We're revamping MTML. We're rebuilding MTML. I know the MTML from old. And we're going to put some new things in, but we're trying to hold on. MTML is 40 years old, believe it or not. And we're trying to hold on to some of that history because they did good work in the community, and we want to maintain that. One thing we'll be doing, and I expect to see every agency there, is I'm applying for a license to have International Literacy Day at the legislative grounds. So on September the 8th, so nobody in here in literacy can't tell me they don't know when International Literacy Day is. So I'm giving you the heads up that that's one of the things that we want to do. And the Learners Conference this year is going to be in September the 20th, not in So when the learners come back, get settled and everything like that. It's a pleasure to see most of you that I know, and I hope to see the new faces at some time around. On behalf of MTML and the field and everyone, I want to thank this beautiful woman for all her work and all her energy. I just love her. So thank you, Jenny, and we are going to see more of you as we go through MTML. I look forward to doing it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You're a great group. Thank you.